Hi. Well, here we are moving into the 17th century. There's really a lot going on at this time period. It kind of is going to move us eventually into the final part of our semester. But this section takes on a number of different issues that are related in many ways to what happens with the monarchy after Elizabeth. So, as we remember, Queen Elizabeth I was a virgin queen, right? She never married. As a result, of course, it meant that she had no direct heir to the throne. Okay, now as you remember, the whole Tudor reign began with Henry VII at the conclusion of the War of the Roses because of a war over succession, remember? And Henry VIII, his son, created the Church of England, separating from the Roman Catholic Church in very much large measure because he could not have a male heir with his wife Catherine of Aragon. Right? They had babies, but they all died except for Mary, his child Mary. And as a consequence, often really more political than due to religious dogma, right? Henry basically dumped the Roman Catholic Church, created a new church called the Church of England, divorced Catherine, remarried, got married again, I should say, and then, of course, to Anne Boleyn, and they had Elizabeth. And, of course, that was no good, so they got to get rid of her, right, and moved on. And eventually, after a while, right, Edward was born. But as we remember from the last section, Edward did not live very long as king and died, and then the throne reverted to Queen Mary, who tried to basically bring Catholicism back to England. That was not really a good move, and she didn't live very long as queen either. And then she, when she passed, right, her throne succeeded to Elizabeth. And Elizabeth I, like Elizabeth II, in fact, had a very long time on the throne. Unlike Elizabeth II, though, as we said, she did not have children. She was never married. She did not have children. And so the throne went to James of Scotland. Now, James of Scotland was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots. And as you remember from our previous section, Mary, Queen of Scots, was eventually executed by Elizabeth. Well, I mean, not directly. She had other people do it. But because Mary had basically tried to overthrow Elizabeth, have her murdered, in fact, at least allegedly anyway. History argues about this. The point being that James Stuart ascended to the throne, James I. When James takes the throne, okay, he's very different from Elizabeth, right? In his style, if you will. He did not have the popular love that Elizabeth had, right? That people who the people really loved Elizabeth. She had the common touch, if you will. She was very popular. James was not, right? He's more distant. And James kind of recognized that there was a new threat, okay? Obviously, and we may have talked about this, we may not have talked about this, Catholics, of course, not when Henry VIII decided to create the Church of England, not everybody in England was all excited about that, right? And not everybody wanted to change from being a Catholic to being an Anglican, right? Member of the Church of England. But there was also another side. And these are the dissenters, or what we in American history, from our side of the pond, have come to call the Puritans. Puritans were called that because they wanted to purify the Church of England. That is to say, they felt that the Church of England had too much holdover from Catholicism, right? And it's hard to emphasize this. The Anglican Church in the United States is called the Episcopalian Church. Was often called the Church of the Middle Way, seeking a middle path between Roman Catholicism and the more strict Protestant interpretations. So the Puritans were on that more strict side. James recognized something, and his son Charles I, of course, later acted upon it. And that is that the Puritans, in their stricter form, were a bigger threat to the monarchy than the English Catholics. Because, at least in Catholicism, there is a sense of hierarchy, right? You have a pope and cardinals and bishops and priests, and it's a triangle, right? Just in the same way that the civilian side, with the king and the nobles and the peasants down below, or the commoners. Whereas if you say everybody is capable of reading the Bible and deciding for themselves, how to pray to God, etc., etc. All right, I'm simplifying, obviously, but this is the idea. It basically removes the idea of a higher authority on earth, okay, that you have nothing between you and God. It's just you and God, right? And James recognized that was a threat to kingly power. That was a threat to the monarchy. And hence, in our own American history, for instance, we talk about why these English colonists came across the Atlantic to settle in what we now call New England, that area, right? They were fleeing oppression. Well, that oppression came from James, and then more so from his son Charles. Charles I was he's kind of an old school king, right? He didn't like having to accede to the will of Parliament, for example, because if what's the point of being a king if you're not, all powerful, right? It didn't make a lot of sense to him, so to speak. To make a long story short, eventually war breaks out. Literally, a civil war breaks out in England between the forces of the king and the Puritan forces led by Oliver Cromwell. Now, I look at Cromwell as kind of a Rorschach test. I mean, what do you see when you look at Cromwell, right? A lot of people see a lot of different things. Some people look at Cromwell as a great fighter for freedom, fighting against a monarchy, an oppressive monarchy, and seeking religious freedom, which also then devolves into political freedom, right? Other people see a theocrat, a person who's just replacing one sort of ruler with a religious ruler. Instead of a king, now you have a person who is ruling from the position of, I know what God wants, kind of thing. There's no one right answer to this. That's why I call it a Rorschach test. It's kind of, what do you see when you look at this character? But to make, as I said, the long story short, although I'm not making it that short, am I? The war breaks out between these two forces. Eventually, Charles is pretty smart. He sent his family, his wife and his kids, to France, which enraged the Puritans because France is largely a Catholic country, right? And they already thought he was sympathetic to Catholicism. His wife was French princess, right? A Catholic also. And so he sends his direct family overseas, across the channel, I should say, to France. Charles is eventually captured. He is brought in front of Parliament, the Puritans, tried, convicted, and executed. Okay, he is executed. So the English executed their own king. After the war, so this is like between 1640 and 1660, Cromwell is ruling. Well, up to 1658, of course, because he dies in 1658. After Cromwell dies, they put his son in charge. How does that look? How do monarchies work, right? Go from child to child to child. Well, all this religious liberty and all that, and what happens? They turn around and give the reins of power to the son of Cromwell. But he's not a very good leader, and he is essentially taken out. I don't mean taken out like shot. I just mean removed from office. And Charles I's son is brought back from France. He is Charles II. This is the period called the Restoration. Okay. And the Restoration because Charles II was restored to the throne. Now, Charles II, while not overtly Catholic, is perceived to have a lot of Catholic sympathies. But very importantly, his brother, James II, the Duke of York at this time, is Catholic. I mean, no bones about it, right? Now, Charles II, of course, his rule should pass to his son, but he doesn't have any with his wife. Now, Charles II has a lot of kids. Yeah, he had a lot of mistresses and all that kind of hullabaloo. And indeed, at one point, there was a plot to have one of his biological sons, his oldest biological son, who was illegitimate, right, not from his marriage, to succeed. The people who were involved in this plot were eventually executed. They were arrested and executed. And after Charles II died, his own son, the son that was supposed to be put on the throne, was also executed. I believe they used a hammer to his head to execute him. Not pretty. James II takes over the throne after Charles II dies. But James II, being Catholic, doesn't have a lot of support. And he is ultimately replaced in what is called the Glorious Revolution by his own daughter, who's Protestant. It's funny how these royal marriages have people with different religions in their families. Her Protestant daughter and her husband take over the throne. William and Mary is their names, right? And that kind of puts an end to the question of Catholic succession to the throne. So why do we have to have all this? Because this really kind of sets the stage for a lot of our writers in this section, very especially John Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost. He was a big supporter of Oliver Cromwell. He writes Paradise Lost after Cromwell is dead and gone, and Charles II is back to the throne. And when we look more carefully at Paradise Lost, we'll talk about this. I'll do another video, of course. But Milton is, in part, right, remembering the paradise of the good old cause, right? Oliver Cromwell and the lost Puritan ideal.